Oh, hello there. Yes, Saturday. Nice and cold. Good day to shave my head, indeed. Yes, I'm just going to want to share a video with you, which I'm going to add a commentary to and add a few visuals as well. I might entitle this, Why You Can't Trust Nigel Farage. Enjoy.
There is one statistic out this week that has been completely and utterly ignored by mainstream media. Yes, of course, I've talked about it on GB News, but nobody else is picking it up. This is what it is. Now, we know, according to government numbers, over 150,000 people have died since the start of the pandemic. And on their death certificates, it says COVID. Now, it can mean they've died of COVID, but equally, it can mean they've died with COVID. But some bright spark wrote to the Office of National Statistics and asked a very simple question. How many people have died with COVID on their death certificate, but with no other underlying health problems?
Okay, just to dive in there. Yes, no other media outlets have picked this up at all. As you can see on the screen, it's a complete non-story. I do love it when Nigel complains bitterly about stuff that you've read everywhere else isn't appearing anywhere else. It's a bit like him being banned from the media. Do you remember that when he had his LBC show and his regular columns in newspapers? Yeah. Yes, right, okay. So this is where Nigel starts to show that stuff that he's read is great, but he doesn't really understand what he's reading because he has no form of understanding or basic statistics, if you like. Now, from what we know of COVID, it mainly affects older people. And from what we know of death certificates have to have a cause of death, okay? Nobody is allowed to die of old age. It doesn't happen on death certificates. So there has to be an underlying reason, and whatever that major reason is will be on the death certificate. So it can well be that, for example, older people with COVID will die effectively earlier than they would have done due to the COVID, but what's on the death certificate might not necessarily be that. Yeah? It's a kind of swings and roundabouts thing, this, but you have to try and get your head round that, okay? Yeah? It is very unlikely that actual cause of death will itself be COVID-19, again, because of these underlying things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these people haven't died earlier. Just want to make that really clear.
I.e., they haven't got a pre-existing heart problem or whatever it may be. And the answer that came back is eye-watering. It is 17,500 people. Now, I'm not, for one moment, underplaying the fact there are 17,500 people there, families, people have lost husbands, wives, mothers, kids. I understand that for all of those, this has been dreadful. But let's get a sense of perspective. We've locked down the country on and off for 2 years. We've put restrictions on people. We've taken away liberties in a way that didn't even happen in the time of World War II. And we've done it all because we were told this was a deadly pandemic. And the fear of that pandemic actually made most of us, most of the time at least, do what we were told. But when you actually learn that we did all of this for 17,500 deaths, and when you understand 700,000 people die in the UK every single year, you begin to get a sense.
Right, yes, roughly speaking, that's true. I'll post up some statistics about the death rate in a short period of time. That might seem like an awful lot of people. It's because we have an ageing population and demographics are shifting. Let's move on.
Perspective. Is Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, talking about this number? No, of course he is not. But it is, I repeat, an Office of National Statistics number.
Right. I might well park that quote in the back of my head the next time the ONS comes out with something that Nigel doesn't actually like.
Another number that came today is, remember just a few weeks ago, the Omicron variant, Boris Johnson's press conference in which he used the word emergency 4 times. And the big worry was London. London is where Omicron was out of control. Could London hospitals cope? Protect the NHS. This is what we've been hearing for 2 years. Well, it now turns out that of those currently in London hospitals, and they're 93% full, but then they always are at this time of the year. Of those currently in London hospitals, of those in hospital with COVID, 60% of those supposedly in with COVID are there for another reason. They just either happen to have COVID, or in the case of half that number, they caught COVID whilst they've been in hospital. I'm not urging people to throw out of the window any sense of being grown up, taking reasonable precautions, cleaning your hands, things like that. What I am saying is I don't think ever again we should completely put our faith and trust in government to do the right thing or to tell us the truth. And that...
Right, okay, yes. The problem I have with this rhetoric is that COVID is not going away. It hasn't gone away. And yes, probably the government did overreact to the last variant, but it won't be the last variant. And what happens if something comes into this country, because after all we can fly anywhere and we don't have to wear masks and we shouldn't wear gloves and we shouldn't bother with anything anymore, despite what Nigel says, he's neatly covering himself on that one. But if something else comes in and it rips in the way that Omicron has, which it's still continuing to do, one of the stories that Nigel doesn't want covered, which also isn't being covered elsewhere, is the amount of school kids that are off with this. Right? It isn't happening, but hey, we'll come on to that one. Yeah? All of this right-wing rhetoric is libertarian stuff because, of course, the economy is a god and we have to keep going. All of this stuff means that if something more deadly with a higher death rate comes in, people will simply ignore it. That's what Nigel's setting us up for here, yeah? Simply ignore it. It might just go away.
Nearly 2 years into this pandemic is the big lesson. That figure of 17,500 says to me, I will never ever take for granted anything government ever tells me again. I will never ever trust anything government ever tells me again.
Right, okay, yeah, and the bitter irony, of course, because one of the major stories that's not being covered today by major news outlets are all the queues of lorries due to Brexit, and I'm never going to trust anything Nigel says about Brexit ever again. Anyway, just to sort of go into that whole thing about deaths, the BMJ is probably go-to source, let's face it. Nice academic journal. I know it's run by Marxist doctors. We'll have to live with that for now. But if you look at their if you look at their statistics in and around deaths, for example in 2020, you notice a sudden spike, and it isn't just physically the numbers. There's a spike in the deaths per 100,000 of population. There has to be a reason for that because the numbers were going down. So why is that? You may notice on some of these graphs that there was a previous spike in 1918. I wonder why that is, Nigel. You'll notice that Nigel isn't talking about that.
And I urge you just to pause and reflect on that for a short moment of time. I'm not advocating anarchy. I'm not advocating law breaking. What I'm telling you is the mindset of our leaders in this country and around the Western world operates through something called groupthink. They all do the same thing, and any critical voices are shouted down, banned, barred, and written off as being bad. But I think that figure of 17,500 needs a lot more circulation and a hell of a lot more debate.
Yes, indeed, Nigel, and it would be a good idea. Why don't you have a debate on your programme with someone that actually knows about these things? And I would imagine it's going to leave you somewhat floundering. And in terms of groupthink, you'll notice that all of the libertarian voices out there, particularly GB News, but all the other usual baying voices on the right from the Daily Telegraph and Toby Young and all the rest of them are all saying the same thing about this. Yeah. They're all saying the same thing, and they have been saying the same thing for the last 2 years, despite the fact that an awful lot of people have died. Let's have a debate about that, Nigel. Or should we have a debate about lorries at the border? I don't mind, mate. I'm game.
Thank you for watching this video. Now, to make sure you don't miss any future videos, please click...
No, my videos, not Nigel's. There you go. Anyway, have a nice one.